Fuck shrimp. Like, you can kill them, just don't eat them. Fuck shrimp.
I mean, I'll eat the ones you don't want.
Welcome back, everyone.
Is this recording? Are we doing it?
We're doing it.
Finally,
We're back.
we're so back.
Yeah, we are so back. Poor Proles Almanac, doing our thing, bringing our A game, maybe the B game.
No. A game's the only kind of game I have.
Okay, if you say so.
I said it.
It's been said.
I'm saying.
So trees? Is that what we're talking about?
No, actually,
What?
not really.
I thought this was the permanent agriculture series.
So it is, but we're going to be talking about a guy.
This guy with the excuses.
This guy right here and that guy that we're talking about with the excuses. He was a big influence on the Back to the Land movement, which we haven't talked about, but is like the very early stage homesteader, permaculture, hippie thing.
What?
I think he means hippies, or is this like cultists?
Yeah. Like hippie, new age, that stuff. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Put it that way. Just
We have
not
a
quite yet.
whole- 12 pages
whole
of clarification coming right up.
Yeah, you don't even know.
It'll be crystal clear at the end of it too. You won't have any
Yes.
questions.
None. I'd never leave anything unanswered. So today we're talking about Scott Nearing. Now, he was a pretty big deal for the Back to the Land movement. He also was a pretty big radical back in the day, but most people still haven't really heard of him. And while what he did in terms of homesteading wasn't really revolutionary or like wildly different, he was a radical and he happened to kind of be in the right place at the right time. We see a lot of overlap with him in the past that we've talked about so far, as well as the overlaps that he has with the future of permanent agriculture that I think makes him kind of a big deal.
Okay, so this is like before Liberty Hyde Bailey discoveries and all that stuff.
Oh, not that far back. He was born on August 6th, 1883.
Thank God. I thought he was going to start at the Ice Age.
Yes, no, he's not that old. He did live a long time, and the way he dies is just chef's kiss. Matt's face on that was perfect. So he was born in this small town called Morris Run, Pennsylvania. This town is like one of those old company towns. His grandfather was like the person. He wasn't the mayor, but he basically owned the town, one of those people. He was one of six, and he was largely homeschooled by his mom. And given that it was this small mining town, there was really no public education system to be, heard of. So she ended up renting a home in Philadelphia so that her kids could get like an actual public education.
Okay, so hang on a minute, because you said this guy earlier. You said this guy was like influential in the 70s, but he was born in 83, as in 1883.
Yeah, he like didn't really hit his prime until his 80s.
So
It's like Colonel Sanders.
yes. So you're telling me I can probably smoke and eat like shit till I'm like 60, and then if I, go out healthy and start hanging out with plants like you, I could live for another 40 years?
Yeah, basically. Like, no notes on that. That is a perfect plan. Don't question it at all. Now, while he was in school in Philadelphia, Scott got exposed to the world outside of the small town that he lived in that basically like bowed to his last name. He got to see how local politics and the role of the church in the community perpetuated the issues that he was seeing like get experienced by like his classmates, and he became very like anti-church and public office. He also got to like see how his classmates lived and like found it this like very stark contrast to the living standards he was used to, even in like the small company town versus like middle class people in Philadelphia. When he graduated, he decided to enroll at University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School on scholarship, and he happened to be going there as J. Russell Smith was finishing up his master's degree at the same time, and they would end up becoming close friends.
Man, I just love the overlaps.
Yeah, it's interesting, the overlaps that we're going to see. Now, one professor, while he was at Wharton, Dr. Simon Nelson Patton, was his first exposure to like socialism and the idea that like there's enough stuff for everyone. What we need to work on is figuring out the best way to actually get those things to the people that need them. And that was what made Scott decide he wanted to be a teacher. So he would end up going back to teach And all of his free time he spent working with the Pennsylvania Child Labor Committee to end the use of child labor in mines, the mines that fed his family.
This guy would have hated Minecraft.
I think it's because he doesn't want to accept the natural order of things. I mean, these children yearn for the mines.
And I've always said that.
It's true. I remember you years ago telling me, listen, there's 3 things I love in life: tree crops, sheep,
sure,
children loving Minecraft. Those are my 3 favorites.
I mean, I went through a stage growing up where I just loved digging. Couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's maybe not all people go through, but not a small segment of the population as a kid just tries to dig a really big hole.
And hit China, yeah, we have to. While he was teaching at UPenn and doing his other odds and ends, he also became exposed to this place called Arden, Delaware. Now, if you're not familiar with Arden, Delaware, it's what's called a single tax town. It was here that he learned about the Georgian tax system and the overlaps that exist between like small government advocates and the popularity of a lot of other socialist positions that sometimes overlap with like this idea of like the Georgian tax.
I mean, the Georgia that I'm in has okay taxes. They're like, it's not no taxes, but they're fine, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different of a Georgia.
This is old Georgia.
More Georgian than Georgia.
Yeah, we're not going to go into it today, but it's basically this idea of finding the most efficient way to apply tax, because there's this thing called I'm not going to remember I'm going to have it flipped in my head now, a tax dead loss. And basically it's this idea that there's this waste that's lost in efficiency because of how tax is applied. And the Georgian tax is basically apply the tax the most efficient way through, which is through the potential for land use. Anyways, yeah, conversation for another day. But between that and the sticker shock of working for a paycheck and like seeing the realization of the struggles of everyday people, Nearing decided all he wanted to do was spend as little money as possible, retire as young as possible, live as simply as possible, and just basically check the fuck out.
I mean, me too. It's not going great, though. Not going great.
Yeah, it's not as easy as you think.
The trick is to not have a mailbox. Those debt collectors can't find you if you don't have a mailbox.
Yeah, you got to do like how corporations do, where you have like nexus in other states through other countries. So certain bills go to which states where they can't be collected. Like you could create a whole system for it. I'm telling you.
I'm just hearing moving money offshore.
Fraud is what you're hearing.
Yes, all of this
legal
this is illegal.
No, we're going to do legal fraud. That's the key.
I mean,
if corporations do it, then we can do it too.
It's the point of the Poor Pro's Almanac, is it not?
It is. Like we should be like we're always fighting that corporations aren't people. No, we should be saying people are corporations.
Interesting.
Because for corporations, we can basically do whatever the fuck we want and not go to prison, right?
I mean, that sounds great.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
We've been thinking about this the wrong way, and we can do better.
People are corporations too.
People are corporations too. Think about it. And actually, there's a really good quote that I want to bring up in a minute that is from Scott Nearing that reinforces my point. And I did not do that on purpose, so it's going to be great. So Scott was teaching. He was teaching elementary economics courses at Wharton. He was teaching at the Temple School of Theology. He was writing. And it was at this time he got to know J.R. Smith at the Wharton School from 1911 to 1916. It was him, Smith, and our best friend, Rexford Tugwell.
Good old Sexy Rexy.
Sexy Rexy. They were all in the same department, the econ department at Wharton School at UPenn, which is just amazing.
I love that they were just some like nerds in an economics department and got like famous for everything else they did instead.
Yeah, it's a beautiful coincidence. And Wharton was like this really perfect breeding ground for them. Now, what's really important to understand is that the Wharton School, much like the small town of Morris Run where Scott came from, was fundamentally supported by the company coal town model. The Wharton family made their money from coal mines. The communities around the school were built on coal mines and company towns, and coal mines and company towns were built on child labor. So, you know, you can start to see the clash of Scott Nearing and like Wharton School of Economics, and that like he would be advocating for like laws to get children out of working in coal mines, And the school would basically be like, do you like having a job? And he would not really respond to them.
Huh. So get them out of the coal mines. These children don't yearn for the mines. They yearn for the factories.
So true.
Progress. Hashtag liberal. So anyways, this whole time Nearing knew his job was at risk. He started teaching part-time at Swarthmore College. He was let go early because of supposed lack of funding, although he was supposedly highly liked by his students. So, someone might have twisted some gears there. He also spoke publicly and got paid, like speaking engagements. And a lot of them were around economics and politics and left-wing ideas, which was a nice way for him to kind of supplement his money. He also started writing on the same subjects, and it got to be to the point where that was actually his primary source of income.
Oh my God. He was like a 1920s bread tuber.
Yeah, basically. Like
a shiver just shot down my spine.
Adjunct faculty bread tube. Yeah, you should be shivering. It's very poignant. Now, here's the quote that I really wanted to bring up as we were talking. He says, in quote, "In regular business practices, these items, labor, materials, overhead costs, subtracted from gross income, give net income. When these usual business deductions are applied to the financing of a moderate-sized wage earner's family, they show not a net income, but a net loss or deficit. The worker is taxed on his gross income, his total wage or salary, while the businessman is taxed on his net income." End quote.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? We need to incorporate, all of us. People are corporations. We are getting that written down in the law books. We're all incorporated. We're paying taxes on what we have after we pay our bills, which is nothing because this is the fucking Poor Proles Almanac.
Holy shit. What if we turn the Constitution into a legal document where it says the people, we put it in quotes and become incorporated as that?
DBA.
Yeah.
We the people TM.
TM.
Yes. Oh, that's the most American thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then sue the government. You got to incorporate it. And then
that's
sue
where I
the
was
government.
going. Yeah, you can do it. Be like it. Oh, that's great.
I'm telling you, we're gonna go so far left we go right, and actually like just do like business classes. That's it.
Oh, good Lord.
But it's to like fuck up economics.
It's just like really
it.
bad business classes.
We can do it, or you can do it. We can help.
Legal fraud 101.
Legal fraud. Yeah, so we should do this. We should only give really good advice for your business that is you, so you never pay taxes. And we take down the government that way.
Let's take a break and let that sink in.
Yeah, let that just...
Hey, we're taking a quick break in the episode to remind you that you can get a whole lot more information from poorproles.com. On our website, we have access to our supplemental reader for the podcast, which provides more depth and context as well as thorough citations for all of the stuff we talk about in the show. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which updates you about limited releases, such as various nursery stock that we sometimes sell through the Poor Proles website, as well as updates about new merch that we have. You can also support the show through that website, poorproles.com, where you have access to our Patreon and our Substack to get early releases for articles and episodes. Now, if you enjoy the show and are just looking for even more audio content, go check out Tomorrow Today, which just wrapped up season 1, or tune into The Gastropocene, which is a project of myself and Dr. Aisha Khan to discuss the way our diets have driven the Anthropocene and what it looks like to use our diets for good. Now, back to the show.
All right, we're back. So as our buddy Scott's, pissing off everybody in academia, tensions rose as like World War I was like becoming clearer that it was on the horizon. And the hunt for subversives grew and worked its way into basically every university. As Scott finished his 9th year at Wharton, he left his desk to spend the summer in Arden, which is what he did every year. When he got there, he got a letter saying that his contract would not be renewed, and he was effectively released of any and all duties from the university starting on June 16th, 1915. Now, if we think all the way back to the J.R. Smith episode, we remember he left because one of his friends was unfairly fired from Wharton. Well, this is that person. Smith had openly criticized Wharton's decision to remove Dr. Nearing in a local newspaper alongside others.
Which notoriously goes over well with your employer.
Exactly.
It's like a pro move.
Yeah, they love it. It's so good for branding and
Mhm.
like
Hmm.
marketing. Like it's just a win-win for everyone. Smith, Nearing, and Tugwell, and a couple other faculty members that are not important enough to name.
The big three.
The big three that we care about. There's actually a fourth one who actually like vocally hated Scott Nearing, but he was like, it's the principle of the thing. If they come after him, they come after all of us. And I was like, that's the kind of fucking energy we need. I fucking hate you, but I will defend you. And he was like, I hate his politics. I hate the way he carries himself, but I will defend him. And like fucking wrote a book over the summer about what was going on. Like that is some hate love dedication. I don't know, it's something, but we need more of it.
It's called an enemies to lovers arc, Andy.
Okay, solidarity campaign.
It's called having principles. Damn it.
Yeah. It's 2024. I don't know what that is, Elliot. All right.
I know. That's why I had to explain it to you.
Anyways, so these three plus one are but our other friends, not friend. They organized a mass newspaper blitz, like basically to make his wrongful firing like national news. It became national news. It erupted around this idea of like free speech and the rights of individuals to speak as they wish when they're not at their workplace.
Oh, well, fortunately, we've gotten that one figured out.
Yeah, no one ever has to worry about getting fired for the things they say outside of work now. So,
Nope.
you know,
It's all good.
clearly this went well. Now, despite this outcry, Nearing was not reinstated, but fortunately found a new home at the University of Toledo, Ohio. He quickly, got back into the same routine he had in New York and connected with radicals, was active in the community, and was forced to resign after a year. Much like something we're going to continuously see in his life, he was told basically that the votes for his dismissal weren't personal and that they liked him and appreciated his work, but there was no room for voices like him in academia at this point. And this would actually be his last, let's call it, conventional teaching position.
So what did he do? He traded in his pen for a sword?
Not that cool.
Did he trade in his pen for a manure fork?
Not yet. So that summer, he once again headed back to Arden, and that's where he was living when World War I broke out.
So he traded it in for a gun.
No, goddammit, let me finish. During this time, when he was back on his summer vacation, the federal authorities took out a search warrant for his office at the University of Toledo, and they basically went through all of his files, documented whatever they could. Scott had worked very closely with the anti-war movement as many peace organizations began to coalesce around one clear message to the United States government: no more war. In New York City, organizers purchased a building at 7 East 15th Street that they called the People's House of the Rand School of Social Science, which would be a central location for education, lectures, books, and so on. Obviously, Nearing was a good fit, was quickly hired to its teaching staff that fall in 1917.
Wait, so they had a socialist school named Rand? Like, is that like Ayn Rand or like Rand Corporation or?
Yeah, so oddly enough, the primary funder for this school was a wealthy woman named Carrie Rand, and she was a lumber heiress.
Great job title.
It's very like 19th century old money.
Mhm. Yeah.
They made their money in wood back when that was a rare commodity.
I've heard that one before. Man, if Fox finds out about this, the proof that the left is funded by the rich is they're gonna have it.
It's over. Sorry, George Soros. They're so close.
It's over
They just need
for
to.
Scott Nearing and
While at the Rand School, Scott also wrote radical pamphlets, despite the risks of being associated with being anti-war as World War I raged on. Radicals were being arrested at this time for opposing the war, for doing things like, in quote, inciting youth to refuse service and, so on and so on.
Yeah, same old story. That sounds a little familiar,
Yeah, I mean, given the protests going on right now about Palestine, this is very, very poignant, I would say. At this time, presidential candidate Eugene Debs was incarcerated, and Nearing wrote a pamphlet entitled The Great Madness. And basically what it did was outlined how global capital demands warfare at the cost of the working class. Again, totally unrelated today. Doesn't ring any bells.
no.
This pamphlet, eventually caused Nearing to get indicted by a federal grand jury in 1918. Instead of attempting to like remove any responsibility for writing the piece, say I didn't do it or whatever, he instead chose to use the witness stand as a pulpit, having his lawyer request he explain all parts of the pamphlet himself, and in many ways just like made a fucking mockery of this entire like system.
Man, when your pamphlet's so good that a federal grand jury has to stop you.
That is like, if we get to that point with this podcast, like we have succeeded. Like that would be just,
You know what?
chef's kiss.
I could give that a miss. Hello, federal grand jury listening to this. Okay, so
Hello.
basically he pulled my cousin.
You guys just keep moving the goalpost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He pulled my cousin Vinny, essentially.
Yeah, like he put his wife on the stand and was just like, actually, she's going to school all of you. Yeah, he kind of did that. His attorney did that. So Nearing was already famous because of the whole shit show with him getting fired, right? So like his name, he wasn't like first name recognition, but he had enough presence that like him being at the federal level again caused like national and international reporters to like pay attention. Nearing advocated that like all of the advertising for like pro peace and the socialist movement that the newspapers reported on, because he just kept the shit going as long as he could, was worth like millions of dollars, that like the left could have never gotten this kind of publicity if the government didn't like try to scare them, right? Because that's basically what they're doing. They're bullying people, being like, you can't write this stuff and we're going to scare you into like saying sorry. Kind of like when Metallica used to go after 9-year-old kids for downloading music. Same thing. After 30 hours of deliberation, he was found not guilty, and basically all that ended up happening was a $3,000 fine against the Rand School for printing the material. So while the case was won and the movement got all this great publicity, press, yada, 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 he became such a hot target that he lost all capacity to do any of his writing. Macmillan Publishing, which had released most of his books, told him that they would no longer publish him. So now he'd lost his teaching opportunities, he'd lost his publishing, and in most of the United States, he lost his ability to do any like public speaking.
Major bummer.
Yeah. If there's anything we know about living in the US, it's standing up for what you believe in, and explaining that you've seen aliens is one way to make yourself a pariah, lose all job opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So true.
It's usually the aliens that get you, though. Except for Dennis Kucinich. Do you remember that? You might be too young, Matt. Elliot, do you remember Dennis Kucinich during the debate in 2004, I think, against Obama? Do you know who he is, Dennis Kucinich, Matt?
No. The name sounds familiar.
He was a governor from Cincinnati or Cleveland. He was the mayor of Cleveland, governor of Ohio, I think. But he had claimed to see aliens. And when he was on the stage during the debate with Obama, Clinton, and a bunch of other people in the first Democratic debate, they asked him to like talk about like, you've claimed to have seen aliens. Could you like talk more about this?
Yeah.
And he was like, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but it was basically like, I can't really describe it, but I can explain to you the feeling of what it was like. And I saw this great light and yada, yada, yada. But yes, perfect example of your career going down in flames because of fucking aliens, because he was a great candidate.
Yep. Don't tell the truth. Don't stand up for what you believe in.
It's the little green guys that get you every time.
Just lie and say the opposite. This country loves lies. They love it.
Yes. So after the war, to get back to our good buddy Scott, Nearing didn't know what the hell to do because he had no prospects. He decided the best thing he could do is go to the Soviet Union in 1925. And what he wanted to do is basically study their educational system and write about it. And then he went to China in 1927, basically to do the same thing. And this is actually only about 10 years after Liberty High Bailey had gone to China. But China was now in the throes of pre-revolutionary struggle.
Okay, so what year did Franklin King publish Farmers of 40 Centuries?
1911.
Okay, so he, King, and Bailey all visited China within like a 15-year period.
Yeah, and this is actually about 2 years before J. Russell Smith releases Tree Crops. And for context of all the other people we've been talking about, this is around the same time Russell Lord met Henry Wallace, future vice president, while traveling the country following farmers. And then our good buddy H.T. Odom was, crushing it at 3 years old.
Wow, Howard. Just everyone else is buckling down, getting to work, kind of behind.
This is me being a baby instead of buying land. Those memes.
Yeah.
H.T. Odom. Yeah. Inspired by what he saw in the Soviet Union, he actually even got to sit down at a meeting with Stalin, came back to the United States, like gung-ho on the Communist Party, decided he was going to start writing and speaking on behalf of the organization at events, continued to research and write, and he ended up writing and working on this piece on the origins of imperialism, and it wasn't in alignment with Lenin's analysis, so he was told, like, you can either publish it and be expelled from the organization or not publish it. Those are your options. So he decided to follow his principles and was like, I don't give a shit if Lenin said this. This is my opinion. So he was expelled. And again, he was told it wasn't personal. That recurring theme, that it was never his fault. It's the specific conditions, yada, yada, yada. So after this, Nearing was like, you know what? Fuck all these parties. They all suck. And I'm going to go figure something the fuck else. But it was around this time that he also ended up meeting his future wife, a woman named Helen Noth.
Well, that sounds all right.
Yeah, no cult-like personality issues at all to be observed here.
Cult of personality? Because, like, listen, the sooner you accept that Lenin was objectively right about every single thing he wrote and said, then you'll be fine. And it's not that Lenin is always right. It's just that when you don't agree, you're wrong. It's completely different.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Let's let that soak in for a minute and get a quick ad for Lenin's Linens.
Lenin's.
He sells slacks. Come on.
At the vanguard of fashion.
Yes.
Are you finding that there's too much fash in fast fashion? This is Carla with Lenin's Linens. We apply the immortal linenist science to keep clothes lasting for decades. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out our pop-up shop in the Red Square in Moscow, Russia, and see how long our work holds up with our hand-picked Short King model, the one and only 100-year-old Vladimir Lenin. Wow, look at that drip. So stop Stalin and get your Lenin's Linens today. Exclusions apply. See Vladimir Putin for details.
All right, we're back.
So I bought like 10 pairs and I got another 10 pairs coming because I'm probably going to be gaining weight.
Yeah, how could you not? I mean, it's literally not an option. He tells you that in the ad.
Mm-hmm. I've always respected him for it.
You will buy this by force. Anyways, back to Nearing. Unable to publish and with like an increasing crackdown on public speech for anti-capitalists, because that's just something that never went away after World War I, Nearing found himself speaking largely in Canada and in the meantime developed the Federated Press along with some other writers that he knew. And it was basically to have an outlet for his writing and the work of others. As the buildup to World War II increased, he was pushed out of his own press for his anti-war position in 1943.
The peace movement during World War II is like an interesting one, though. Like probably the only justified war that the United States has ever been in.
You're just going to say that like I'm not sitting right here?
Okay, like international war.
No, enemies foreign and domestic, Matt. I just cherry pick phrases. That's what I do.
Just like the people, TM.
Hell yeah.
Anyways, so before he was kicked out of his own publishing company, he did publish his 6-part series from his travels to the Soviet Union and China, which he had printed by a doctor-turned-printer named Dr. Bob Leslie. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that then unknown Ruth Stout, like that Ruth Stout, operated as a voluntary secretary for the enterprise, which ultimately spread several 100,000 pamphlets across Canada and the United States between 1927 and 29 under the name Social Science Press.
Wait, so you mean like the gardener Ruth Stout?
Like the Ruth Stout method person? Yes, one and the same.
Wild. No, cultivated.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Not wild.
Well played, Matt. That was nice. Subtle. During the Great Depression, Nearing wrestled with kind of what his place within the world was now that he was blacklisted. And he decided his best solution was to just like disconnect from the system that fed the war machine. And for him, this meant homesteading. So in 1932, he decided to move from New York City to the Green Mountains of Vermont.
Oh yeah. So it's been like 50 years of this guy's life, and we haven't talked about farming or anything basically this entire episode revolving around plants. Trees,
Yeah, no,
grass,
he
nothing.
there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of documentation of him having any interest in this stuff, although I'm sure he did. And I got to imagine that J. Russell Smith was some kind of influence on that, as well as Rexford Tugwell. Like, all these guys went to school for economics and ended up doing farming shit, so I don't know. Make sense of that.
It's the universal truth.
It is. So the reason why I wanted to cover all this though before is because like he does have this really fascinating life and overlaps that I think are really important to understand why his significance in the 70s has like this really interesting like connection to the past, right? And to be honest, like the farming piece that he offers the world, like the actual practices and everything wasn't particularly special. It was very like run-of-the-mill homesteader kind of content.
Sort of shit you'd see on TikTok now.
Yeah, basically. Like it's very, I mean, more boring and not like hacks or anything, just like straight up fucking a row of tomatoes, a row of cucumbers, that kind of shit. Like there's nothing crazy going on. But the philosophy that underlied his work and his vision is what made his work so important for the boom and the like commune back to the land movement, which we're going to cover in a couple weeks. So they got to Vermont and they purchased land next to their farm for timber production. They ended up not clearing it and actually deeded the land to the town of Winhall in 1951, and it's still protected and used as commons today. Now, part of the reason why the Nearings never cleared the land was because in 1934, the farmer next door sold off their sugar bush to them with all of the necessary equipment. For non-New Englanders, sugar bush is just like maple syrup, maple tapping, maple tree tapping. After they did their first season, it became clear to the Nearings that a season of sugaring could pay all their bills, or at least most of them, and allow them to live what they called the good life. Or so they said.
Got that sweet, sweet maple money. Insert foreshadowing music here.
Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to plug in my keyboard eventually, I promise.
There you go, Matt. Part of Scott's goal was to find ways to integrate into the local landscape. To him, this didn't just mean like that your food was grown locally, but like the way you lived reflected that landscape. So that meant for him, like, we live in a very rocky, mountainous area. We should be using those rocks to build our homes, which you guys know as New Englanders, it's not a whole lot of stone construction, right? It's mostly wood. And his point was like, okay, well, why not? Even though no one else is doing it, we can do it. While he was in Vermont for nearly 2 decades, he and Helen built over a dozen stone buildings using what's called the flag system. And this is basically a DIY designed stone building method that was advocated by a guy named Ernest Flagg. It's also known as slip-form stone masonry.
I mean, I'm not a genius, but it sounds like doing construction with stone and like doing masonry on the fly. Is that really like a DIY thing? Can you just like, I don't know, pre-internet, that sounds pretty wild.
Look, if I DIY my house and it falls down, it better kill me.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to do it again.
Exactly. So if you're going to DIY it, like, make sure that shit's going to kill you.
Who do you think the first person to learn what a keystone was?
It wasn't the first person.
How many times do you think they fucked that up on those arches? So many dead people.
It was not the first person to build a house out of stone, I'll tell you that much. It was like the third or fourth. While in Vermont, they would spend like most of the year actually building these stone buildings instead of like growing food, as you might think. And they built stone buildings for sugar houses, for guest houses, for garages, for storage buildings, wood sheds. Basically everything was stone. It was like Oprah with you get a car. Like everyone gets a stone building. While the Nearings could be described as like cash poor, their only need for cash was really for property taxes. They had no electricity, no refrigerator, grew all their own food, basically few, if any, expenses. Helen would say, and this is a quote from her, "We were poor in the country, but it was better than being poor in the city. Instead of eating out of garbage cans, we ate out of our own garden," end quote. It was also this time that Scott would start writing again and try to like write about non-political stuff to try to earn some kind of small income. So they wrote a book on maple sugaring and like the profitability of it. And it did like pretty decently help bring in some money.
Okay, so Scott Nearing invented remote work. He started working from home in the country.
Yeah, this is how gentrification began. Scott Nearing.
Write it down. Take notes.
Take notes. And when they got there, they had intended to like build community in their towns, but it seemed like it was always a struggle, and they never really made any material improvements. And like this idea of like trying to create a dual power, like local economy community. And like that's not totally surprising given that like his politics are pretty radical. Him and his wife were vegetarians in the 50s, 40s, 30s. Again, you show up someplace that you've never lived in a small community and you're like, you're building your houses wrong. Like, you're probably not going to make a lot of friends doing things differently than everyone else.
Yeah, you're not going to get very far showing up to Winhall, Vermont in the 50s and telling people not to eat sausage.
Matt's like, I know from experience.
Hell, say the meat is a sausage-eating people. And I mean that strictly.
Okay, so I don't know what to say to that. As they settled into this Vermont lifestyle, somebody bought one of the nearby ski resorts and basically started developing that entire area, turning that area into the kind of touristy trap that we know today versus
is that actually Sugarbush, the ski resort?
It might be. I don't know enough about that area, but I'm guessing. Is that the main one that's over in Green Mountain Valley, Matt?
I don't know exactly. Sugarbush is in Vermont.
It is in Vermont, yeah.
It's near Warren, but I don't know.
Not that important.
Not that important, listeners.
What we do know is that our friends, Scott and Helen, were frustrated with all these newcomers. Ironic, right? And like the changing of the community from all this influx of new people and capital and yada, 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 that they decided that since they'd never made any real progress in this idea of like collective labor, mutual aid, fuck it, we're going to start over again. And they headed to Maine. And they're like, you know what? We've learned a ton. We should write it down and we should sell it as a book. So at 72 years old, Scott and Helen wrote this book called Living the Good Life, How to Live Sanely and Simply in a Troubled World. And this was quietly published in 1954.
Wait, hang on. So they decided to start over when he was 72 years old.
He was like a young 72. Like he had a good 30 years left in the tank.
All right.
I mean, just thinking about living that long right now, it's aging me right now. I don't think I have that long left.
Yeah. Now, regarding their book, the publisher who had released the maple sugar book had said he was interested in publishing it. However, he had a stroke, and that was no longer possible. So the Nearings chose to self-publish the book, again under the publishing house that he had written and distributed with Ruth Stout, the Social Science Institute. While we don't have like actual hard data on this, it's believed that no more than about 3,000 copies of the book were distributed in this first printing.
Really shaking up the homesteading community.
Right? Now, a lot happens between its initial release in 1952 and when it was republished 2 decades later. And this is something we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. You have the beginning of the countercultural revolution in the 1960s into the 70s, the Vietnam War, which split much of the country, and young people who basically only knew the post-war boom, who decided that they wanted nothing to do with the corporatism that basically had provided them with like the lavish lifestyles they had had their entire lives. And while we're not going to talk about it right now, this 20 or so year period really explains a lot of what's going on today in terms of like homesteading, permaculture, yada, yada, yada. And again, we're going to cover that a little bit more in a few weeks. But the short of it is that when the left-leaning back to the land movement began, it was really Scott and Helen's book, that inspired them to take that next step. And there's a really good reason for it, which we're going to talk about in a second. But when it was republished, it quickly sold out over 50,000 copies. And it's been basically called the Back to the Land movement's Bible.
So it's like right place, right time?
Well, yes, but also part of its appeal was that they proclaimed that they only worked as hard as they had to, end quote, which often meant like working only part of the year, largely because of the profitability of the maple sugaring season. The rest of their days were described to be broken into 3 4-hour chunks. 1 4-hour chunk for work, 1 for civic duty, which meant like helping and adding value to their community, and 1 4-hour chunk for personal interests. Now, understandably, this was really attractive to readers that were either trapped in or staring down the barrel of the lifetime of a 9 to 5.
I mean, it just sounds like permaculture minus the civic duty part.
And the Instagram influencer teacher part.
That too.
Yeah, it's like you can grow all your food for only a few hours a week bullshit that people then like sell their classes to, right? Now, the Nearings highlighted that individuals could, in theory, live mostly by their own labor, almost entirely outside of the capitalist system. Or at least that was like their vision, right? And the reality was that it was much more complicated than that. Their new home in Maine, which they called the Forest Farm, was something of a mecca visited by like a lot of these back to the land people in the 70s. But it turns out what they were selling wasn't entirely true.
Let me guess. Justafarian baby showed up.
Yeah, so in 2003, a book by the author Gene Haybright uncovered evidence that the Nearing survival was a bit more complex than previously suggested. Haybright knew the Nearings quite closely. They were one of those pilgrims that had come from, I think she was from like Ohio or something, and went to Maine to see the Nearings and how they were living and decided to buy land there and actually purchased 30 acres of land from the Nearings. She also, like, to speak to the fact that like this, it wasn't like a cash cow attempt or something like that. She was actually one of the stewards of the Good Life Center, which is what their homestead was later converted to after they passed away, and it still exists today. She was dedicating parts of her life to maintaining the Nearings' memory. So, like, this was not a hatchet job, so to speak, or at least not fully. So, one of the things she realized is that, like, how come we can't do it and they seem to be able to do it? We're busting our asses, we're making less money than them, and like we're barely surviving and they're just fine. Like something's not adding up, right? So she started doing some research and she's able to find that one of the key components of their financial survival was not on making a living on 4 hours a day, which is like their whole fucking thing, right? But rather that they had investments in, quote, banks, stocks, annuities, monetary gifts, inheritances, and unearned income from other people's labor that kept Scott and Helen going as far back as the early sugaring days in Vermont, end quote.
Oh my God. They were just farmers with woofers. This whole thing comes crashing down. But I know.
Tales old as time.
Is this really like a huge surprise? Wasn't Scott's family like running a coal town?
A literal coal town, yes.
Wait, what was the name of it?
They had some money. Morris Run.
Should have been called Nearing Run, right?
Right.
But I don't know, there's a good chance that he had some kind of trust, even if it wasn't huge.
I mean, I've seen it before. People, usually wealthy kids, they'll spend a lot of time trying to, not resent the fact that they have a safety cushion to fall back on. And they go out and try to do big things so they feel like they earn their keep, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and Helen's family was pretty rich too. So like between the two of them, they had more money available to them.
So they knew they weren't going to starve. That's why they could eat out of their garden.
Exactly. Now, while I agree that this is an issue, obviously, in terms of like if you're selling this like lifestyle and getting people to like sell their worldly possessions to buy land, like, yeah, that's kind of shitty. But Haybright does level a bunch of other criticisms at the Nearings in her book, which I don't think are really particularly useful.
So it was a hatchet job. You said it wasn't. It sounds like it was.
Well, it ended up kind of going that direction, even though it seems like she did have like this genuine investment and interest in the Nearings as people. I'm curious how much of that was an editor's involvement. But she does criticize them, like they were vegan, but sometimes ate ice cream, and it's like, who gives a fuck? Just like little stuff like that was just kind of like, you have this one really good point about like the financial stuff, and then clearly you needed more content to fill up the book. And I think that's what it was, less than like an actual like malice, which is unfortunate because I think it does water down like the fact of like you could spend more time talking about why this is a big deal and like what are some alternatives to having done things this way, so that what they were trying to present could either prove that this idea of like this is not possible, or to say like what other things could we have done to like fully unplug from capitalism or whatever. And I think like people like Gene felt like failures for not being able to equate the successes of the Nearings. Like they weren't willing to sacrifice enough to live the good life or whatever.
I mean, big Joel Salatin of the left energy.
To hide your trust fund, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how many times people need to hear this, but the key to success in this country is vast sums of money.
It's not a surprise.
Always has been, always will be.
Whatever you want to do, you just need that and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So this really raises this question of like, how do we choose to engage with his work given that context, right? Not just that he had a trust fund, but that he hid the trust fund. I think that's probably the worst part about it, right?
It's that you lied to us.
Yeah, it is. You know, from my perspective, I actually take it as like this really validating moment because it's confirmation that even this couple with zero health issues that literally didn't have fucking electricity and were like using holes in the ground to like refrigerate their food. They built their own house with their own hand. They DIY'd a fucking house and they still couldn't disconnect from capitalism, right? And that's like the whole point we've been trying to make. So instead of pretending you can, I think it actually reinforces and validates the whole point we've been trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, at least we aren't wasting our time trying to do something that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know, man. I don't know. They don't know.
No one knows.
They don't know.
They don't know that they don't know. All right, let's wrap up Scott's final days because I told you that it was pretty badass. So Scott was getting weaker as he got older. When he was 100 years old, he could no longer carry firewood into the house for cooking and heating and everything. And he just decided it was time to go. So according to his wife, Helen, he decided to stop eating. And he lay down in his bed and starved himself to death at home while Helen cared for him, which is just like, yeah.
Jesus.
He didn't dig a hole first. That's mean. Make Helen carry you outside, dude. Just
I feel like also like maybe also there's obviously like something like philosophical and not being able to like care, but you're like 100. That a species kind of like evolved so that like really old people didn't have to carry firewood,
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. He was just like, time to die. I guess I'm going to go lay down and wait for it to happen.
pretty much. But I mean, maybe that's one of his first failures. Then he didn't really have that community or communal support that he was looking for in the end, because it sounds like it was missing if he just went and laid down in bed.
Guess I'll die now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the Nearing story, the Scott Nearing story. And like I said, we covered a lot in this episode, and like you can see this like spread from the J. Russell Smith period and even Liberty Hyde Bailey period all the way into the 70s, which is just like this wild scope of like
So much happened.
Yeah.
So much happened in the world.
Yeah, and like all the stuff we've covered was just the first half of his life, and he was alive for basically all of it, and then did all this other shit afterwards. So we kind of touched on a couple things. So I mentioned he's vegetarian. That was largely inspired by like biodynamic and organics, which was a big core of his homesteading book. He did some really weird shit that we didn't cover around what his diet or what they thought like a healthy diet looked like. Now, the back to the land movement that took off because of Nearing's work is also worth exploring, and how that shaped things like the permaculture movement and a lot of that like new age homesteader kind of shit that we see like pop up over the next couple decades. We're also going to look at how the Vietnam War and the veterans returning from home fed into like a lot of white supremacy and the white supremacy that we see in like a lot of the homesteader movement. We see that now today with like the trad life kind of shit, right? That all is a part of the same like ball of wax, so to speak. Some of that also ties back into the young agrarians that we had talked about in the 1930s. The dudes that were talking about how the enslaved people actually made white people worse. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Ringing any bells, guys? Yeah. So
it does.
Yeah, those guys are coming back a little bit, and how there was a rebirth in the 80s that kind of fed into the white supremacy movement.
So you said we're almost done with this episode, but you just listed off like a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're done with this episode, but we are not done.
That's like 10 other episodes in that last paragraph that you just said.
That's like 4. And then like a permaculture episode, and then like maybe an agroecology episode.
Sure, and then we could jump over to Waco, and then we could do
We could,
Oh my God.
actually.
or Oregon, then we could do McVeigh and Oklahoma, and
And we still got to do Uncle Ted.
We're never going to talk about anything but history again, are we?
Oh, and I do want to talk about retro suburbia because that ties like a lot of these pieces together. Like all of it, actually. It's
I
kind of
mean-
fucking weird.
that's got a word that means history in it, Matt. Retro.
It
Mm.
does. And we didn't even talk about like Scott's diet. Like he was against eating pickled foods, which I don't
What?
Dom, cut the last 5 minutes out.
I don't understand how you can be a vegetarian and be like, I don't like pickled foods or
You just
carbonated
didn't like
drinks.
them,
Like they were
or-
bad. No, like you said, they were bad for your health.
Oh.
Like as well as carbonated drinks. Like I understand soda, but like carbonated water.
You saying
really?
he wrote a book saying carbonated drinks is bad for you because it hurt his tummy?
Yeah, he
This
did.
guy's
He-
losing.
his-
This guy's losing points. Stop talking. I don't
well,
want to
it
hear.
was
his-
his, I think it
Scott
was his
here.
wife that wrote the book, but like I think it's them together. They're very big into the macrobiotic, which I don't understand how you can be and then be against pickled foods. I don't know. Like I said, there's stuff going on. Yeah, that's all I got.
The true pickle divide in the back to the land movement.
It's not left versus right. It's pickled versus not.
Yeah.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?